I'm recording this because I can't keep it inside anymore. My hands shake every time I try to write it down, so maybe talking into this microphone will be easier. My name is Sarah Johnson. I'm 42 years old, and I'm terrified. Not the kind of scared you get watching a horror movie or walking alone at night. This is different. This is the fear that comes from knowing your body isn't entirely your own anymore. The fear that comes from looking at your 12-year-old son and wondering if he's safe, if they'll come for him next, if everything you thought you knew about the world was just a comfortable lie. I've always been drawn to exact sciences. Math and physics were my favorite subjects. They made sense, had rules, predictable outcomes. I play drums at our local church sometimes because rhythm grounds me, keeps the chaos in my head organized. I believe in facts, data, things you can measure and prove. That's probably why what happened to me feels so much worse. When your entire worldview crumbles, when the impossible becomes undeniable, it doesn't just scare you. It breaks something fundamental inside. I'm a single mother raising Jake here in the desert. I've worked as a meteorological technician for 15 years, maintaining weather stations scattered across remote areas between Rachel and Groom Lake. The solitude never bothered me before. Now every shadow might be watching, every sound might be them coming back. The worst part, Jake keeps asking why I won't let him walk to his friend's house alone anymore, why I check his room 3 times before bed, why I wake up screaming. How do you explain to a child that his mother might be changing into something else? How do you tell him that the nightmares aren't really dreams? I was born in Lincoln County, went to local schools, earned my degree at UNR. Normal life, normal family. My father worked the mines. My mother waited tables. We didn't look for trouble or make things up for attention. But now I'm that woman. The crazy lady telling impossible stories, checking locks compulsively, jumping at every unexpected sound. The fear never leaves now. It sits in my chest like a cold stone, making every breath an effort. When I look in the mirror, sometimes I don't recognize the face staring back. My eyes have changed. Not just the way they see in the dark now, but something deeper. Something that makes Jake uncomfortable when I look at him too long. I'm sharing this because I'm drowning in isolation. Because maybe there's another parent out there experiencing the same terror, the same physical changes, the same horrible certainty that something is terribly, irreversibly wrong. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you exactly what happened, from the night in August when my life stopped being my own. It was August 3rd when everything changed. I remember the exact date because it was Jake's last week of summer camp and I'd been looking forward to having him home again. Funny how you can remember such normal details from the day your life splits in two. The call came around 11:30 p.m. from our regional dispatch center. I work as a meteorological technician for the National Weather Service. Basically, I maintain weather stations scattered across Lincoln County's remote areas. These stations collect data around the clock. Temperature, wind, stuff like that. It's important for flight safety and storm warnings, especially out here where weather can turn deadly fast. Usually when equipment breaks during storms, we fix it the next day. But this wasn't usual. Our station near the old mining area had gone completely dark during one of the worst electrical storms I'd seen in 15 years. Not just offline, it was sending weird scrambled data before dying completely. Since that station provides weather info for military training flights, they needed it fixed immediately. I should mention, I only get called for middle-of-the-night repairs when there's literally no one else available. My regular partner Dave was on vacation with his family, and our backup guy lives 4 hours away in Reno. My supervisor Lisa sounded genuinely sorry when she called. "Sarah, I know it's late, but the FAA is pressuring us about the station," she said. "Military training exercises tomorrow morning, and they need current weather data. I wouldn't ask if there was any other option." I stood in my kitchen, looking down the hall toward Jake's room where he slept. At 12, he's growing so fast I can barely keep up. How did he get so tall almost overnight? Just last year he seemed like such a little boy, but I still don't like leaving him alone at night, even though he'd probably be fine. As I drove north on Highway 93, I thought about the practical stuff. This job supports Jake and me. The divorce 3 years ago left me with the house and this reliable Ford F-250 that my ex-husband had used for his contracting work. 15 years of maintaining weather stations across Nevada's most isolated areas had taught me to be prepared. I kept tools, backup equipment, and emergency supplies in the truck bed. Water, first aid kit, flares, that sort of thing. But tonight felt different. The storm had been unlike anything in my training. Lightning that lasted too long, readings that made no sense. As a scientist, I trusted my instruments over gut feelings. When equipment failed, there were usually logical explanations, but some deeper part of me was screaming to turn around and go home. That's when I noticed the headlights in my rearview mirror. An old tan Dodge pickup had appeared behind me, maintaining exactly the same distance regardless of how I adjusted my speed. In Lincoln County, where everyone knows everyone's vehicle and driving habits, this truck was a complete stranger. I'd been making this route for over a decade. I knew every rancher's rig, every contractor's work truck, every border patrol vehicle that operated in this area. My chest tightened with genuine fear. Out here, 70 miles from the nearest town, being followed meant real danger. Women working alone in remote locations develop keen situational awareness, and every instinct was telling me something was wrong. What if this was one of those stories about people who vanish on lonely desert roads? I thought about Jake back home. He might not notice I was gone, but he'd definitely notice if there was no breakfast waiting. The kid has developed this incredible appetite lately. My hands were shaking as I reached for the radio to call dispatch, but the equipment started malfunctioning. Static burst through the speakers, then an unfamiliar voice, mechanical and distant, told me I wasn't alone and should keep moving no matter what happened. Before I could process that strange message, the Dodge suddenly accelerated, past me at high speed, and disappeared into the darkness ahead. Just like that, I was alone again. I should have felt relieved, but instead I felt more unsettled. Maybe it really was just some tourist or thrill seeker heading to the famous back gate viewing area. Still, the encounter reminded me how careless I'd become. Living in a quiet place like Lincoln County, you forget about basic safety precautions. I made a mental note to buy some pepper spray. Working alone at night in remote locations, especially this close to Area 51 with all the attention it draws, I should be more prepared. The radio crackled back to normal as I approached the weather station, but that strange voice echoed in my mind. Who had been speaking? And why did they know I wasn't alone? The weather station sat in a fold of desert hills, more isolated than I'd remembered. Station LNV7 looked exactly like what it was, a utilitarian collection of white metal boxes, solar panels, and monitoring equipment rising from the scrub brush like some kind of technological scarecrow. But something felt wrong the moment I stepped out of the truck. The storm had passed, yet the air still hummed with the residual electricity that made my skin prickle. Even worse, the night was completely silent. No wind through the sagebrush, no insects, no distant highway noise, just an oppressive quiet that felt unnatural. I approached the main housing unit, flashlight in hand, trying to focus on the job. Lightning damage was usually straightforward, fried circuits, melted connections, maybe a cracked solar panel. But what I saw didn't make sense. The equipment showed precise geometric damage patterns, clean cuts in metal housings that looked almost surgical, burn marks that formed perfect straight lines and right angles. In 15 years of fixing storm damage, I'd never seen anything like it. Lightning is chaotic, destructive, random. This looked deliberate, controlled, as if someone had used advanced cutting tools with impossible precision. That's when I noticed the marks in the ground around the station, symbols burned into the hard-pan desert floor, perfect circles, interconnected lines, geometric shapes that formed some kind of pattern. The earth was fused, glass smooth in places, as if subjected to incredible heat for precise durations. My scientific mind struggled to find explanations. Focused electromagnetic discharge, some kind of experimental military weapon being tested nearby. But deep down, a more primitive part of my brain was screaming warnings I couldn't ignore. I knelt beside the main data logger, trying to assess what could be salvaged, when the desert around me went completely silent. Even the subtle sounds I hadn't consciously noticed, my own breathing, the settling of cooling metal, the distant hum of insects, simply stopped. The silence was so absolute it felt like being underwater. Then the air itself seemed to thicken, charged with an energy that made every hair on my body stand on end. That's when the sky exploded with light. Pure white illumination flooded the landscape, bright as an operating room but completely silent. No thunder, no crackling electricity, no sound of aircraft. I looked up and saw something that defied every law of physics I understood. A perfect ring of light hung motionless about 200 feet above the station, maybe 30 feet in diameter. It pulsed with rhythmic intensity that seemed to sync with my racing heartbeat. The light had no visible source, no aircraft, no searchlight, no ground-based projection. It simply existed, floating in violation of gravity and common sense. My legs felt like water. Every rational thought fled as I stared at this impossible phenomenon. I wanted to run, to scream, to do anything but stand there frozen in terror, but my body wouldn't obey. Time began to behave strangely. My watch had read 1:05 a.m. when I'd first seen the light, but seconds felt like hours. I tried to move, to call out, but the air seemed thick as honey. My voice disappeared into the silence as if the sound waves themselves were being absorbed. The light pulsed brighter, and I felt a strange tugging sensation, like being gently pulled upward. Not physically, something deeper, as if part of me was being drawn toward that impossible ring of brilliance. My last coherent thought before the world went white was wondering if this was how it felt to die. Then everything disappeared in a flash brighter than the sun, and I was gone. The next few hours come back to me in fragments, like pieces of a strange dream. But it wasn't a dream. Every detail was more real than reality itself. First came complete panic. I was floating weightlessly, but not in space, in some kind of corridor filled with thick, milky white light. The air smelled of ozone and something metallic, like I'd licked a battery. Beneath that layer was a sickly sweet scent like overripe fruit. The sounds were all wrong. A low-frequency humming penetrated straight into my bones, making my teeth ache. Over this drone came sounds like whispers, but not human ones, more like rustling dry leaves or metal scraping against glass. I tried to scream, but my voice wouldn't work. My arms and legs wouldn't obey me, as if they weren't mine anymore. The panic was absolute. I understood that something unthinkable was happening, but I couldn't stop it. Gradually, the terror began to dull. Maybe it was my brain's protective mechanism, or maybe they were doing something to my consciousness. I suddenly remembered being in the hospital as a child with appendicitis and how the nurse held my hand before surgery. The same feeling of helplessness, but with the certainty that someone knew what they were doing. They gently placed me on something hard and smooth. The material was warm, almost alive to the touch, but definitely not organic, like polished stone that had been lying in the sun for hours. Now I could see them, tall, thin figures moving with remarkable smoothness. Their faces, it's hard to describe. The features were almost human, but wrong. Eyes too large, chins too narrow. Their skin had a grayish tint and seemed semi-transparent. Then something shifted in my perception. The fear disappeared completely, replaced by incredible peace. I suddenly remembered myself at 7, lying on grass in my grandmother's garden, watching clouds and feeling like part of something vast and beautiful. One of them touched my forehead. The touch was cool, electric, and suddenly a voice sounded in my head, not words, but pure meaning penetrating directly into my consciousness. Don't be afraid. We won't harm you. Euphoria washed over me in waves. It was like that drowsy state when you're almost asleep but still aware of your surroundings. Every cell in my body relaxed. I felt loved, protected, important. They were doing something to my body. I felt gentle touches, warmth from some kind of instruments, but nothing painful. More like a preventive examination with a very delicate doctor. Sometimes something cold touched my skin, and I heard quiet clicks, like camera sounds. At some point, I felt something thin and warm touch my hair. Not painful, just a strange sensation, as if someone was very carefully combing through strands and doing something with them. Time ceased to exist. I could have been lying there for minutes or hours, impossible to tell. Reality became viscous, fluid. Childhood memories wove into what was happening. I was simultaneously an adult woman on this table and a 5-year-old child seeing a meteor shower for the first time. The last thing I remember was an incredible feeling of gratitude. I was grateful to have been chosen, to have been allowed to see this, to become part of something greater. The euphoria was so intense I almost wept with happiness. Then darkness, and I woke up in my truck. The first thing that hit me was the disorientation. My head felt stuffed with cotton, thoughts moving like thick syrup. It was the same groggy, drugged feeling I'd had after wisdom tooth surgery. That artificial haze when your brain knows something important happened but can't quite grasp what. The dashboard clock glowed 3:47 a.m. Over 2.5 hours gone. But it felt like I'd been unconscious for minutes, maybe seconds. My mouth was dry as desert sand, with a metallic aftertaste that wouldn't go away no matter how much I swallowed. That euphoria I'd felt on their ship, Craft. Whatever that place was, it couldn't have been real. No human being feels joy while strangers do things to their body. It had to be some kind of gas, some chemical they'd used to keep me compliant. The realization made my skin crawl. How dare they manipulate my emotions, make me feel grateful for being violated? But as the fog in my head began to clear, the real horror started sinking in. My left wrist was stinging. When I pushed up my sleeve, there it was, a thin silver line about 2 inches long, perfectly straight like a surgical incision. But when I checked my right wrist, my stomach dropped. Another mark, identical in length and precision. Both hands. They'd done something to both hands. I yanked down the rearview mirror to examine my face, and that's when I noticed my hair. At first glance, everything looked normal, but as I ran my fingers through it, certain sections felt wrong. The texture was different, thicker, coarser, like it wasn't mine. Near my left temple, a small patch felt almost synthetic. Too perfect, too uniform. When I pulled a strand into the dome light, the color was slightly off. Same brown shade, but with an artificial sheen. They'd removed some of my hair and replaced it with something else. The memory fragments surfaced. Careful hands cutting sections, placing them in metal containers. But they'd also put something back. Foreign hair. Implanted hair. My breathing became rapid and shallow. What else had they done while I was under their chemical influence? What other parts of me weren't mine anymore? I checked my arms, my legs, anywhere I could see skin. No other visible marks, but that meant nothing. They could have done anything, taken tissue samples, inserted devices, altered things I'd never be able to detect without medical equipment. The violation felt complete and intimate in a way that made me want to scrub my skin raw. They'd had total access to my unconscious body for over 2 hours. The euphoria they'd induced suddenly felt like the cruelest part, forcing me to enjoy my own helplessness. I started the truck with shaking hands, desperate to get home, to shower, to somehow wash off the feeling of being studied like a specimen. But as I drove through the dark desert, one terrifying thought kept circling. Why me? Why had they chosen me specifically? And worse, would they come back? But I couldn't just drive away. Tomorrow morning there would be military training exercises, pilots depending on accurate weather data. People could die from bad forecasting. I forced myself out of the truck, grabbed my tools with shaking hands. Focus, Sarah. Do your job. I approached the damaged station, reaching automatically for my flashlight, then stopped. I could see everything perfectly clearly in the complete darkness, every wire, every connector, every scorch mark on the equipment housing. Not blurry shapes or dim outlines, but crystal clear detail as if it were broad daylight. My blood ran cold. This wasn't adrenaline or shock. This was real. I tested it, covering my eyes, then uncovering them, looking away and back. The impossible vision remained. They had done something to me, altered me in ways I was only beginning to discover. Fighting down panic, I completed the repairs mechanically, replaced burned circuits, reconnected severed cables, tested the data transmission. The station came back online within an hour, professional habits overriding existential terror. The drive home was a blur of mounting dread about what else they might have changed. The first few days after the incident, I tried to convince myself it had been some kind of elaborate hallucination brought on by stress. Desert isolation, maybe even a gas leak from the damaged equipment. But the evidence of what had happened to me kept mounting. The night vision wasn't going away. If anything, it was getting stronger. I could read fine print in complete darkness, spot details that should have been invisible. During the day, bright sunlight started bothering me more than usual, making me squint and reach for sunglasses I'd never needed before. Then came the thirst, or rather, the complete absence of it. By the 3rd day, I realized I'd consumed maybe half a glass of water total. In Nevada desert heat, it should have been impossible, but I felt fine, perfectly hydrated despite drinking almost nothing. My body temperature had stabilized at exactly 99.8 degrees Fahrenheit. Not a fever, just a new normal that my system seemed to have adopted. I felt better than I had in years, more energetic, more alert, but every improvement felt like proof that I was becoming something other than human. The dreams, sleep brought no relief. Every night, I experienced vivid, structured dreams that felt more like recovered memories than unconscious imaginings. I would find myself back in that white room, on that smooth table, completely aware of what was happening to me. In these dreams, I could see their faces clearly. Not quite human, but not entirely alien either. Their eyes were larger than ours, but they had expressions I could almost read. Curiosity, clinical interest, something that might have been compassion, though filtered through an intelligence so different from ours that I couldn't be sure. They communicated without words, concepts appearing directly in my mind. I understood that they were studying not just my body, but my consciousness, my memories, the way human thoughts formed and connected. I was a specimen, but not just a biological one. I was a window into how our entire species thinks and feels. The worst part of these dreams was that they felt protective of me, almost parental, as if they were improving me, upgrading me for my own benefit. The violation became secondary to their apparent belief that they were helping. I would wake from these dreams with my heart racing, but also with the disturbing sense that I missed being there, under their care. 2 weeks after the incident, I scheduled a routine physical with Dr. Martinez, my longtime family physician. I needed to know what they'd done to me, but I couldn't explain the circumstances without sounding insane. The blood work results were impossible to ignore. My white blood cell count was off the charts, but not in a way that suggested infection or disease. Dr. Martinez called it unprecedented immune system activity. More disturbing were the antibodies. I was now immune to diseases I'd never been exposed to, including several that didn't exist in North America. Sarah, have you been traveling internationally? Participated in any medical trials or experimental treatments? Dr. Martinez asked, reviewing my charts with a puzzled expression. No, nothing like that, I lied, watching her struggle to make sense of the impossible results. She recommended I see a specialist in Las Vegas, mentioned possible autoimmune conditions that could cause such anomalies, but we both knew this wasn't any condition in her medical textbooks. The hardest part was the growing distance between me and everyone I cared about. I couldn't tell anyone what had really happened, who would believe such a story, but keeping the secret was eating me alive. Jake noticed the changes first. Kids are sensitive to when adults are hiding something important. He started asking why I wasn't drinking water at dinner, why I wore sunglasses indoors sometimes, why I jumped every time he came up behind me. Mom, are you sick? He asked one evening, finding me staring out the kitchen window at the desert, watching for lights that shouldn't be there. No, sweetheart. Mommy's just tired from work. But I could see the worry in his 12-year-old face, the way he started watching me more carefully, as if I might disappear at any moment. By September, the physical changes were becoming impossible to ignore. I started having spontaneous nosebleeds, not painful, just sudden flows of bright red blood that would start without warning and stop just as abruptly. Unexplained marks appeared on my skin while I slept. Always 3 parallel lines, perfectly spaced, like someone had drawn on me with a precise instrument. They would appear on my arms, my back, my legs, always in places I couldn't have reached myself. The electromagnetic effects were the most unsettling. Electronic devices around me started malfunctioning. My radio at work would pick up strange frequencies. My phone would display text messages in symbols I didn't recognize. At home, the microwave would turn on by itself, always at exactly 2:47 a.m. Jake started sleeping with his bedroom door closed. By early October, I couldn't pretend this was an isolated incident anymore. The evidence was overwhelming. I had been systematically altered, changed into something that was no longer entirely human. But the most terrifying realization wasn't what had happened to me. It was the growing certainty that I wasn't alone. The improvements to my immune system, the enhanced night vision, the way my body no longer needed normal amounts of water. These weren't random experiments. They were adaptations. Adaptations for what? A different environment, a changed world. Were they preparing humans for something we couldn't yet understand? I thought about my brother Michael, who had vanished 15 years ago after returning from military service, changed and paranoid. How many others like us were out there carrying alien modifications we didn't fully comprehend? That brings me to today, October 1st, sitting in my kitchen at 2 a.m., recording this message while Jake sleeps down the hall. I'm sharing this because I can't carry it alone anymore, and because someone needs to know what's happening to ordinary people in places like Lincoln County. I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm not looking for sympathy or attention. I just need someone to hear this, to have a record of what they're doing to us in case others are experiencing similar changes and think they're losing their minds. If you're listening to this, and you've had your own encounter, you're not crazy. The night vision, the strange dreams, the physical changes, they're real. You're not alone. But be careful who you tell. Be careful who you trust. And whatever you do, don't go out alone at night in remote areas, especially not if you live near places like Area 51, where the boundaries between our world and theirs seem thinner than they should be. They're still out there, still choosing people, still conducting whatever long-term study or preparation they started decades ago. I don't know what comes next for me, for Jake, for any of us who've been changed. All I know is that the woman who drove out to fix that weather station 2 months ago isn't the same woman recording this message.